I need to teach you something, Alina said, taking my hand at her daughter's wedding. Hello, I'm Marcus. I'm 26, working at a small architecture firm while finishing my degree. And I've always been the guy who follows the rules, not the one making scenes at weddings, not the type to disappear with someone's mother. But I notice things the way light catches, how spaces breathe when someone's hiding behind perfect composure. I grew up in Seattle, moved here 3 years ago for school. Nothing extraordinary about my life, which is probably why what happened that September night at Castellano Vineyard still doesn't feel real. Alina pulled me through the crowd, past the collapsed champagne tower, toward the stone stairs. The bride's mother, elegant, 47, completely in control. The art of the discreet exit, she whispered. I shouldn't have followed. But, before we begin, let me know where in the world you're watching from today. It's always fascinating seeing who's joining us from around the world. I never expected to find myself at the Castellano Vineyard that September afternoon, standing at the altar as one of Jessica's groomsmen. The late summer light filtered through ancient oak trees, casting dappled shadows across the gathered guests. That's when I first truly noticed her. Alina Castellano, the bride's mother, sitting in the front row. Her deep emerald dress caught the sunlight in a way that made the fabric seem alive. Shifting like wine in a crystal glass, her auburn hair, touched with elegant threads of silver, was swept to one side in a style that looked effortless but must have taken considerable skill. At 26, I'd dated women who tried their best to seem sophisticated, who wore clothes they thought made them look older, who affected mannerisms they'd seen in movies. But Alina simply was. Every movement spoke of years lived fully, of confidence earned rather than imposed. The officiant's voice drifted through the afternoon air, speaking about how love appears in unexpected places, how connections form when we least anticipate them. That's when it happened. Our eyes met across the short distance between altar and front row. The moment stretched, became something more than just a casual glance. Alina tilted her head slightly, and I saw an expression cross her face that I couldn't quite read. Recognition, maybe, but of what? Something passed between us in that moment, like a question neither of us had asked but both somehow understood. I forced myself to look away, to focus on the ceremony, on my duties as a groomsman. But throughout the rest of the service, I found myself increasingly aware of her presence, like a warm current in still water. As the reception spread across the vineyard's terraced gardens, I tried to maintain my designated role. I smiled for photos, guided guests to their tables, made sure the wedding party knew where they needed to be. But my attention kept drifting to Alina as she moved through the gathering with natural grace. She spoke with old friends, laughed with her daughter's new in-laws, and handled a brief encounter with her ex-husband with such poise that few would have guessed their history. Later in the afternoon, I spotted her standing alone by the stone balustrade overlooking the valley. She'd stepped away from the crowd, though whether for a moment of peace or reflection, I couldn't tell. The champagne flute in her hand caught the light as she dangled it loosely from her fingers, more forgotten prop than drink. Her gaze was distant, taking in the rows of grapevines that stretched toward the horizon. I knew I should stay with the wedding party. There were toasts coming up, more photos to be taken, traditions to be observed. But something pulled me toward that solitary figure by the balustrade, something I couldn't name, couldn't quite understand. My feet were moving before I'd made a conscious decision, drawn forward by the same force I'd felt during that shared glance at the ceremony. The sounds of the reception grew fainter with each step I took toward her. The string quartet's music, the laughter, the clinking of glasses, all of it seemed to fade into the background, leaving only the soft rustle of the wind through the oak leaves above us. I was close enough now to see how the late afternoon light played across her profile, how it caught the silver in her hair and turned it to pure light. Alina must have sensed my approach, but she didn't turn right away. Instead, she remained still, like someone waiting for a photograph to be taken. Or perhaps, like someone allowing another person to join their solitude without breaking it. As I approached, The late afternoon sun caught the crystal of her champagne flute, sending tiny prisms across the stone balustrade. Before I could even introduce myself, Elena turned with a knowing half-smile that transformed her whole face. "You're Marcus," she said, her voice carrying a warmth that matched her expression. "Jessica told me all about how you saved the bachelor party when that fishing boat captain never showed." Very quick thinking with the sunset sailing tours, I felt my face flush slightly at the memory. I'm just glad someone in our engineering group knew how to sail. Though I think David was more relieved than anyone. He'd been dreading having to tell Jessica the whole weekend was ruined. "Well, from what I heard, you turned potential disaster into everyone's favorite memory of the week." She gestured at the sweeping view before us. Speaking of potential disasters, this whole vineyard almost became a housing development back in the 1970s. The original Castellano family, no relation to me. I married into the name fought for nearly a decade to preserve it. Really? I wouldn't have guessed looking at it now. These terraces feel like they've been here forever. I studied the geometric precision of the grape rows stretching toward the horizon. That's what drew me to the venue, actually. The marriage of natural landscape and human design. Elena's eyes lit up as she spoke. In my gallery work, I'm always looking for that intersection of organic and constructed beauty, the way light plays across steel and glass, or how sculpture can echo natural forms. "You run a gallery." I leaned against the balustrade, genuinely intrigued. "I curate contemporary art exhibitions in the city. Mostly emerging artists who work with unconventional materials or spaces." She turned toward me with interest. "Jessica mentioned you're transitioning from engineering to architecture." "Yes, I'm in my first year of my master's program. It's been humbling, to say the least. Going from structural engineering, where everything has a clear right answer, to design studios where suddenly everything is subjective." Elena nodded thoughtfully. "That tension between technical precision and creative expression, that must be fascinating to navigate. What drew you to make the switch?" I found myself telling her about my moment of realization during a particularly soulless corporate project. Watching how she listened with complete attention, unlike the polite nodding I often got when explaining my career change, Elena asked pointed questions that showed she was truly engaging with the story. "So there I am," I continued, getting to the part that still made me cringe. "In the middle of my first major design presentation, and my entire digital model crashes. Blank screen. And instead of having a backup plan, I just stood there, staring at my black screen like it might suddenly come back to life." Elena's laugh was genuine and warm. "Oh no, what did you do?" I grabbed a marker and started sketching the design on the whiteboard from memory. Terrible wobbly drawings that probably looked like a child's art project. But somehow, the clients loved it. Said it felt more authentic than the polished renderings. Her eyes crinkled at the corners as she smiled. Sometimes our moments of greatest vulnerability end up being our most genuine connections. I realized then that I hadn't felt this naturally comfortable talking to someone in months. There was no need to filter my thoughts or second-guess my words. The conversation simply flowed. The opening notes of the band's first song drifted up from the reception below, and I could see the wedding coordinator making her way through the crowd, obviously looking for missing members of the wedding party. "Should check on Jessica," Elena said, straightening up from the balustrade. "Mother of the bride duties never quite end." She touched my arm briefly as she turned to leave, a warm pressure that lingered even after she withdrew her hand. "Save me a dance later." The look in her eyes held something more than just a casual request, a promise, perhaps, or an invitation to continue what we'd started here. I nodded, not trusting myself to put into words the sudden anticipation I felt. I watched her make her way back toward the reception, her emerald dress catching the light as she descended the stone steps. Already, I was counting the minutes until that promised dance, replaying the gentle pressure of her hand on my arm, the way her eyes had held mine with unspoken understanding. Dinner service rolled out with clockwork precision, though I found my attention drifting across the reception tent more often than I'd like to admit. Alina sat at the family table, engaged in animated conversation with the bride's new in-laws. Every so often, I'd catch a flash of emerald as she gestured, or the musical sound of her laugh rising above the general din. I managed to focus long enough to deliver my groomsman's toast without stumbling over my words. The story about David's first failed attempt at asking Jessica out got the laughs I'd hoped for, especially when I produced the actual coffee-stained napkin where he'd practiced writing his phone number 15 times. Through it all, I was acutely aware of Elena's gaze, the way she smiled at just the right moments, as if we shared a private understanding of the humor. The cake-cutting ceremony began just as the sunset painted the valley in deep orange and purple. Jessica and David played it sweet rather than silly, sharing delicate bites instead of smashing frosting in each other's faces. I was just thinking how smoothly everything was going when chaos erupted near the champagne tower. Uncle Tony and Ty Askew stumbled backward into the carefully constructed pyramid of glasses. Time seemed to slow as the first tier wobbled. Then, like crystal dominoes, the entire structure began to collapse. The crash brought everything to a halt. Hundreds of champagne glasses cascaded down, creating a spectacular mess of broken crystal and spilled champagne. I immediately moved to help, grabbing a nearby tablecloth to contain some of the spreading liquid. "Oh dear," came a familiar voice at my elbow. I was wondering when Uncle Tony would make his contribution to the evening's entertainment. I turned to find Alina beside me, surveying the scene with composed amusement. Before I could respond, her hand found mine with surprising firmness. "I need to teach you something," she said, her eyes sparkling with mischief. The art of the discreet exit. Her grip was warm and certain as she began leading me away from the chaos. We wove between dancing couples and clustered conversations. Alina navigating the crowd with the grace of someone who'd mastered the social art of being seen and then conveniently forgotten. Each step felt like entering a bubble where the reception's noise grew slightly more distant. The stone steps to the upper terrace were lit with strands of tiny lights, creating pools of gentle illumination in the growing dusk. Elena's hand remained in mine as we climbed, and I found myself marveling at how natural it felt. No awkwardness, no uncertainty, just the simple rightness of her fingers laced with mine. When we reached the top, Alina released my hand and turned to face the valley. The reception tent below glowed like a paper lantern, music and laughter floating up in waves. "Sometimes," she said, "the best part of a party is knowing when to steal a moment above it all." She glanced at me with that same knowing half-smile from earlier. "Let them sort out the champagne disaster. I'm sure, between the wedding planner and David's mother, everything will be fine." Her confidence in taking charge of the situation, and effectively taking charge of me, was both surprising and intriguing. I'd dated women who played at being sophisticated, who tried to project an air of worldly wisdom. But Alina simply was who she was, comfortable enough in her own skin to reach out and take what she wanted without apology. The way she'd led me through that crowd, certain of both our destination and my willingness to follow, it spoke to something I hadn't realized I'd been missing. Someone who knew their own mind, who could take control of a moment without making it feel like a power play. Down below, I could hear the wedding coordinator's voice rising above the general commotion, directing the cleanup effort. But up here, with the valley spread out before us and the first stars beginning to appear, that chaos felt like it belonged to another world entirely. The upper terrace opened before us like a private balcony to the evening's festivities. Strings of lights wove through the oak trees, creating a gentle canopy that mirrored the emerging stars above. Below, dancers moved across the garden floor in shifting patterns while the mountains in the distance turned a deep purple against the darkening sky. Elena's hand slipped from mine as she moved toward the stone balustrade, and I felt the absence of her touch more acutely than I expected. The warmth of her fingers had left an imprint that seemed to linger, making me suddenly aware of how empty my own hand felt. "Beautiful, isn't it?" She gestured toward the valley, where the last traces of sunset painted the clouds in watercolor shades of pink and gold. "From up here, It all looks like a scene from an old film. I joined her at the railing, careful to leave a respectful distance between us. The reception tent glowed below like a paper lantern, spilling light onto the surrounding gardens. Laughter and music drifted up in waves, creating a soundtrack to the tableau before us. "Look there," Alina said softly, pointing upward. "You can just make out Cassiopeia, even with all these lights." Her finger traced the constellation's distinctive W shape among the emerging stars. "And there, that's Perseus, her hero. Though, personally, I always thought she could have managed fine on her own." I smiled, surprised by this unexpected knowledge of astronomy. "I wouldn't have pegged you as a stargazer." "There's more to art than what hangs on gallery walls," she replied, her eyes still on the night sky. Some of humanity's first artwork was trying to make sense of those patterns up there. The conversation flowed from there with remarkable ease. I found myself sharing details about my current architectural projects, not just the basic facts I usually offered, but the deeper inspirations behind them. I told her about the community center I was designing, how I wanted the space to feel both welcoming and transformative. "That's what great architecture does," Alina said, nodding. "It shapes how people move through the world, how they interact with each other. Like great art, it changes perspectives." We discovered shared dreams of visiting Kyoto during cherry blossom season, and laughed about both having Marrakesh's Medinas on our travel wish lists. Alina spoke about a small restaurant in Bologna where she'd had a meal so perfect. She still remembered every detail 20 years later. I countered with the story of finding an underground jazz club in New Orleans that made me forget what century I was in. Time became elastic in our secluded spot. The party continued below, but it felt increasingly distant, like watching a movie with the sound turned low. Alina leaned against the balustrade, her profile softened by the twinkle of lights strung above us. "It's strange," she said, after a comfortable lull in conversation, "watching Jessica's wedding from up here. I'm happy for her, of course. David is wonderful, and they're so clearly right for each other. But there's this sense that a chapter is closing." She touched her champagne glass absently. "When did my little girl become someone who could be a wife?" I understood what she meant about life's thresholds, those moments when you stand between what was and what will be. "It's like finishing a good book," I offered. "You're satisfied with the ending, but there's still that moment of loss when you close the cover." Alina turned to me with a look of pleasant surprise. "Yes, exactly like that." Her smile held a warmth that made my chest tighten slightly. "Though I suppose every ending is also a beginning, isn't it?" The music from below shifted to something slower, more intimate. Couples on the dance floor drew closer together, their movements becoming more synchronized. Up here, though, we remained in our own world, marked by the gentle glow of lights and the deepening purple of the mountain shadows. The night air carried the scent of late roses and distant woods. Elena's voice softened as she turned the conversation toward more personal territory. 3 years ago, my marriage ended," she said, tracing the rim of her champagne glass. 20 years of shared life, wrapped up in lawyers' offices and division of assets. She gave a small, rueful smile. "The strange part wasn't the grief. I expected that. It was the sudden sense of liberation that caught me off guard. Like opening the curtains in a room that had been dark for too long." I listened, watching how the moonlight caught the silver threads in her hair. She spoke with a candidness that made me feel both privileged and protective of her trust. At 44, I found myself having to remember who I was before being someone's wife. Elena's eyes met mine. "Do you know what I did first?" I enrolled in figure drawing classes at the Art Institute. Something I'd always wanted to do but had convinced myself I didn't have time for. "Was it scary?" I asked, genuinely curious. Starting something new at that point. "Terrifying," she admitted with a quiet laugh. "My hands shook so badly during that first class, I nearly snapped all my charcoal, but by the third session, I remembered how much I loved the pure act of creating." She paused, considering. "Then I booked a solo trip to Venice. Just me, wandering the galleries, sitting in cafes, learning to trust my own judgment again." Her words resonated with something unsettled in my own chest. I understand that fear, I said, surprised by my own openness. Leaving engineering for architecture, everyone kept asking if I was sure, if I'd really thought it through. As if 26 was simultaneously too young to know what I wanted, and too old to start over. Elena turned toward me, her expression thoughtful. The fiction of prescribed timelines, she said, moving closer to where I stood at the balustrade. That's what I've learned to ignore. This idea that there's a correct age for discovery or reinvention. Her presence beside me radiated warmth, even as the night air grew cooler around us. But how do you know? I asked, voicing the doubt that had followed me through every major decision. How can you be sure you're not making a massive mistake? You don't, she said simply. You just learn to trust that even mistakes can lead somewhere interesting. She smiled, and I could see the wisdom in it, the hard-won peace with uncertainty. A breeze swept across the terrace, carrying the music from below. Elena shivered slightly, her bare shoulders catching the moonlight. Without hesitation, I shrugged off my suit jacket. Here, I said, moving behind her. You're cold. As I draped the jacket over her shoulders, she turned her head toward me. Our faces came unexpectedly close, close enough that I could feel the warmth of her breath, catch the subtle scent of her perfume. Time seemed to slow, crystallizing around this single moment. Elena's eyes met mine, and I saw something there that mirrored my own feelings. A mix of surprise and recognition, of possibility and danger. Neither of us moved. The space between us felt charged with potential energy, like the air before a storm breaks. The jacket settled softly around her shoulders, but my hands lingered there, barely touching the fabric. Everything narrowed to these small points of almost contact. Her breath against my cheek, the whisper of silk under my fingers. The mere inches separating us in the moonlight. Someone laughed below in the garden, the sound drifting up like a reminder of the world beyond our terrace, but still we remained frozen in that delicate moment, balanced on the edge of something that felt both inevitable and impossible. Neither of us moved. The jacket settled around Elena's shoulders, but my hands stayed there, barely touching the fabric. Her face remained turned toward mine, our breaths mingling in the cool night air. The string lights below cast a soft glow that caught the elegant line of her collarbones, visible above the neckline of her emerald dress. This is probably unwise, Elena whispered, but her hand found mine on the stone balustrade. Her fingers were warm as they slipped between my own. Definitely unwise, I agreed, but couldn't bring myself to step back. The wine hummed pleasantly in my blood, and the music drifting up from the reception seemed to wrap around us like a cocoon. Everything about this moment felt dreamlike, yet achingly real. The subtle scent of her perfume, the way moonlight silvered the edges of her hair, the slight tremor in her fingers against mine. I'm not sure who moved first. Maybe we both did. Drawn together like magnets, finally released from their restraints. The first kiss was gentle, questioning just the softest brush of lips, lasting long enough for both of us to understand exactly what line we were crossing. When we pulled apart, Elena's eyes searched my face with a vulnerability I hadn't seen in her before. Marcus, she said softly, I need you to think about this. The age difference. She took a shaky breath. We met at my daughter's wedding, for heaven's sake. Are you sure? I stopped her words with another kiss. Deeper this time, more certain. My hand slipped from her shoulders to her waist, and hers moved to my chest, fingers curling into my shirt. This wasn't the tentative exploration of our first kiss. This was a choice, deliberate and clear. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathing unsteadily. The air between us felt charged, fundamentally altered. Elena's hands stayed on my chest, and I could feel her heart racing to match my own. The sophisticated curator I'd watched all evening was gone, replaced by someone more raw, more real. Her lipstick was slightly smudged, and a strand of hair had come loose from her elegant updo. She'd never looked more beautiful. Your room, or mine? She asked quietly, the question hanging between us, like smoke in still air. I felt the weight of the decision in my bones. Whatever happened next would change everything, not just this night, but all the nights that followed. The familiar trajectory of my life would shift into something entirely unknown. Standing there in the moonlight, Alina warm and real in my arms, I knew we were balanced on the edge of something that couldn't be undone. The music from the reception swelled up around us, a slow song I half recognized. Below, the party continued. Unaware of this moment unfolding on the terrace above, everything felt suspended in this single breath, this pause before answering her question. Neither, I said, surprising myself as much as her. Not yet, not like this, rushed and hidden. I watched relief and disappointment chase each other across Elena's face, and knew I'd made the right choice. The moment deserved more than a hurried encounter born of wine and moonlight. She deserved more. Walk with me, I asked, offering my hand. Elena's smile was soft as she laced her fingers through mine. I'd like that. We descended from the terrace together, following lamplit paths that wound between the vineyard rows. The September night wrapped around us, like silk, carrying the scent of late-blooming jasmine and distant bonfires. Music from the reception faded and swelled as we wandered, providing an intermittent soundtrack to our meandering conversation. Tell me about Paris, I said, remembering her earlier mention of the city. Elena's eyes lit up. The Musée Rodin is my favorite. Everyone goes to the Louvre, but there's something magical about that mansion and its gardens. The sculptures seem alive at twilight. She paused, then added more quietly, I've always wanted to write about it. Actually, not just an art book, a novel. You should, I said, squeezing her hand. Why haven't you? She laughed softly. Oh, the usual reasons. Time, fear. My mother's voice in my head, telling me to be practical. Her tone shifted, revealing older hurts. She never understood why I chose art history over law. We still barely speak, even after all these years. We paused between rows of grapevines, their leaves silver in the starlight. Alina turned to face me, her expression curious. What about you? What makes Marcus Chen tick beyond beautiful buildings? I found myself telling her about late nights listening to Miles Davis while sketching impossible structures. Buildings that defied physics but captured something true about human longing. Sometimes I worry, I admitted, that switching careers was selfish. Engineering was safe, respectable, ... And completely wrong for you, Alina finished. Reaching up to trace my jaw with gentle fingers. We kissed again, unhurried this time, hidden between the vines. Each kiss felt like unwrapping a gift slowly, discovering new aspects of each other. When we resumed walking, Alina told me about studying art in Florence, while I shared stories about growing up in a family that measured success in very specific ways. The night deepened around us as we talked. 2 o'clock became 3, marked by the gradual exodus of wedding guests from the main property. We found a wooden bench overlooking the valley and sat close together. Alina, still wearing my jacket, despite the warmth of our wandering traced red ribbons along distant roads as cars departed, one by one. Neither of us mentioned the impending end of our time together, but I felt it approaching like a tide. Alina leaned her head against my shoulder, and I breathed in the subtle scent of her perfume mixed with the vineyard air. The music had stopped entirely now, leaving us in comfortable silence, broken only by crickets and the occasional owl. Tell me something true, Alina whispered, her hand finding mine again. I've never talked with anyone like this before, I said, the words falling naturally into the dark. 8 hours ago, you were just the bride's mother in an emerald dress. Now, ... She squeezed my fingers. Now. Another car left the property, headlights sweeping across the valley before disappearing around a bend. The night felt vast and intimate at once, full of possibilities we hadn't yet named. The lights from the venue had dimmed to a soft glow behind us as Alina and I walked the winding path toward the parking area. Our pace was deliberately slow, each step an unspoken agreement to stretch these final moments. The night air had cooled enough that I could see our breath mixing in small clouds between us, somewhere in the distance. The metallic clatter of cleanup crews dismantling tables echoed across the grounds. The sound only emphasized how empty the venue had become, how this pocket of time belonged just to us now. "My car's just ahead," I said, though we could both already see it, waiting under one of the few remaining lit lamp posts. The yellow light pooled on the asphalt like spilled honey. Elena's heels clicked softly against the pavement as we approached. "I suppose this is where our evening ends," she said, but made no move to step away from me. Her shoulder stayed pressed against my arm, warm through the thin fabric of my dress shirt. I turned to face her, taking in how the lamp post light caught the silver threads in her hair. "It doesn't have to be the only evening," I said quietly. She smiled, reaching into her clutch to pull out what looked like an eyeliner pencil. "Give me your hand. Give me your hand." I held out my palm, and Elena took it in both of hers. The touch of the pencil was cool against my skin as she carefully wrote out a phone number. Her handwriting was elegant even on this unusual canvas, each digit precise and clear. "I'm curating a new exhibition," she said, still holding my hand as she finished writing. "The opening is Thursday evening at my gallery in the city. I've been working with this remarkable young artist for months to put it together." She looked up from my palm, her hazel eyes catching the light. "It would be nice to see you there. Away from all, ... She gestured vaguely at the wedding venue behind us, ... This context. I understood what she meant. Away from the complications of how we'd met, the weight of family connections, the rushed magic of a wedding night. Something real, in the clear light of day. "What time?" I asked, already knowing I'd move heaven and earth to be there. 7 o'clock, she said, finally releasing my hand. "Come find me if you want to do this properly." I looked down at the numbers on my palm, committing them to memory, just in case. When I looked back up, Elena was shrugging out of my jacket. She held it out, and our fingers brushed as I took it from her. That small contact sent electricity through my tired body, waking every nerve ending. "Thank you for the loan," she said, softly, "and for the company. And for ... She paused, searching for words, ... knowing to wait. Before I could respond, Elena stepped forward and kissed me. It was brief, but full of promise, her lips soft and certain against mine. Then she was stepping back, keys appearing in her hand. "Good night, Marcus," she said. Turning toward her car parked a few spaces away, I watched her walk away. Memorizing everything about this moment, the way her emerald dress caught the lamplight, the confident click of her heels, the elegant line of her neck as she glanced back once before opening her car door. The sound of her engine starting broke the spell, and I watched until her taillights disappeared around the curve of the drive. Standing there under the lamppost, I ran my thumb across the numbers written on my palm. Thursday suddenly felt very far away, but I knew with absolute certainty I'd be at that gallery at 7 o'clock sharp. The night air held the lingering trace of Elena's perfume, and somewhere in the distance, an owl called out into the darkness. Arrived at the gallery precisely at 7 o'clock on Thursday evening. Having changed my shirt 3 times and switched my usual messenger bag for a slim leather portfolio that felt more suited to the arts district, the contemporary space occupied the ground floor of a renovated industrial building, its windows glowing like a lantern against the early autumn dusk. Through the glass, I could already see the crowd inside, elegant people in dark clothes moving between white walls hung with vibrant canvases. My heart picked up speed as I pulled open the heavy door. Immediately enveloped by the murmur of conversation and the subtle scent of wine. And there she was. Elena stood across the main gallery space, wearing a black dress that somehow managed to be both professionally appropriate and absolutely stunning. Her silver-touched hair was swept up tonight, emphasizing the graceful line of her neck. She was gesturing animatedly as she spoke to a small group gathered around a large abstract painting. Her natural authority evident in how they leaned in. To catch every word, I let myself watch for a moment, taking in how completely in her element she seemed here. This was her world, and she moved through it with the same easy confidence I'd glimpsed at the wedding. but amplified. Then she saw me, her face, lit up with that same knowing half-smile from our first conversation. And though she didn't break away from her group, her eyes held mine for a heated moment before returning to her discussion. That brief contact was enough to send warmth spreading through my chest. I began moving through the space, studying each piece while remaining acutely aware of Elena's location in my peripheral vision. The artwork was fascinating. Bold abstracts, in unexpected color combinations that seemed to shift, meaning the longer you looked at them. Occasionally, I'd catch Elena's gaze across the room as we both circulated, having entire conversations in glances while speaking to others. "The technique here is remarkable," a woman next to me commented, gesturing to a particularly striking canvas. "The layering creates such depth," I nodded, offering my thoughts on the architectural quality of the composition. As we talked, I felt more than saw Elena approaching from behind me. "I see you've met our talented artist's biggest champion." Elena's voice came warm and close to my shoulder. "Marcus, this is Patricia, one of our most valued collectors." Patricia, Marcus is an architect, friend, with an excellent eye for spatial dynamics. Friend, such a simple word to carry so much unspoken weight. I shook Patricia's hand while hyper-aware of Elena's presence beside me, close enough that I could smell her perfume, something subtle and expensive that made me think of warm skin. We fell into a discussion about the relationship between visual art and built spaces, Elena's hand occasionally brushing my arm as she made a point. Each casual touch felt deliberate, electric. I found myself leaning slightly into her space whenever she spoke. Drawn by some magnetic pull I couldn't resist. The evening progressed, and I watched Elena work the room with graceful efficiency. She knew exactly when to draw people into conversation, and when to let them move on, all while maintaining that thread of awareness between us. As the crowd began to thin, she made her way back to where I stood, studying a smaller piece tucked in an alcove. "What do you think of this one?" she asked, standing close enough that our shoulders touched. "There's something about the movement in it," I said. "Like watching thoughts take shape." She smiled, pleased. "I have a few pieces from this series at my apartment that didn't make it into the show. Some of the artist's earlier work that's actually more experimental than these." The invitation hung in the air between us, clear but carefully phrased for public consumption. Around us, gallery assistants were already beginning to collect empty wineglasses as the last few patrons made their way toward the exit. "I'd love to see them," I said, matching her tone of professional interest while my pulse quickened at the real meaning behind her words. Elena's eyes met mine, holding that same promise they had under the lamppost 4 nights ago. "Let me just wrap up a few things here," she said softly, "and we can walk over? I'm only a few blocks away." We stepped out of the gallery into the kind of perfect September night that makes you fall in love with cities all over again. The streets were quiet except for distant traffic and the occasional burst of laughter from nearby restaurants. Elena pulled a light wrap around her shoulders as we fell into step together. "It's just 3 blocks this way," she said, gesturing north. "Unless you'd rather not." "I want to," I answered simply, honestly. We walked in comfortable silence, our shoulders occasionally brushing. The city felt different at this hour, softened by evening light and the way shadows pooled between buildings. Elena pointed out architectural details I'd never noticed on facades we passed. The Art Deco flourishes on a converted warehouse. Terracotta details above century-old windows. Her building was a restored brick structure with large industrial windows, the kind of place that spoke of both history and careful modernization. The doorman nodded to Elena with familiar warmth as we crossed the lobby to the elevator. I watched our reflection in the polished brass doors, her elegant in black, me in my carefully chosen blazer, both of us carrying the charged energy of anticipation. Her apartment was on the 8th floor, and when she opened the door, I immediately understood why. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed a stunning view of the city skyline, lights twinkling against the deepening night sky. The space itself was a perfect expression of Elena. Exposed brick walls hung with contemporary art. Built-in bookshelves filled to overflowing. furniture that managed to be both sophisticated and inviting. "Wine?" she asked, moving toward the kitchen with natural grace. "I have a lovely Barolo that would pair well with art appreciation." I smiled at her gentle irony. "Perfect." While she opened the bottle, I took in more details of her space. A well-worn leather armchair sat beside the windows with a stack of art magazines nearby. Black and white photographs clustered on one wall. Some appeared to be family. Others looked like gallery openings through the years. The whole apartment felt curated, but lived in, like Alina herself. She returned with 2 glasses of deep red wine, leading me toward a section of wall where several canvases hung in careful arrangement. These pieces were smaller than those at the gallery, more intimate in scale and execution. One in particular caught my eye, swirling colors that seemed to pull you into their depths. I felt Alina watching me as I studied it, standing a few feet away with her wine glass cradled in both hands. "What do you see in this one?" she asked softly. I took my time answering, letting the painting speak to me. "It's like looking into someone's thoughts during a moment of revelation. See how these darker colors here seem to be opening, blooming, into something new. But the original shapes are still visible underneath. It's about transformation while holding onto your core self. When I turned to gauge her reaction, Alina was looking at me with surprised pleasure. That's remarkably close to what the artist told me about her inspiration for this piece. She painted it during a major life transition, like leaving engineering for architecture. I smiled. Or rediscovering yourself after 20 years of marriage. Her eyes met mine over the rim of her wineglass. Exactly like that. The air between us felt charged with possibility. Alina moved toward the balcony doors, sliding them open to the night air. "Join me." The balcony was intimate, just big enough for a small table and 2 chairs. The city spread out below us, a tapestry of lights and movement. We stood at the railing, close enough that our arms touched. "I haven't done anything like this since my divorce," Alina said quietly. "Whatever. This is between us." "I haven't done anything quite like this ever," I admitted. "You're unlike anyone I've been drawn to before." She turned toward me, wineglass forgotten on the railing. "And that doesn't worry you? The age difference, the complications, all of it." I set my own glass down and faced her fully. "The only thing that worries me is not exploring whatever this could be." The kiss was inevitable, deeper than our stolen moments at the wedding. There was no need to rush now, no crowd to hide from. Alina's hand slid inside my blazer as mine found her waist, pulling her closer. The night air was cool around us, but everywhere we touched felt like warmth spreading through my veins. When we finally broke apart, both slightly breathless, Alina's eyes were dark with promise. "Marcus," she whispered against my lips, and my name had never sounded quite like that before. The city lights painted patterns across Alina's face as she took my hand. Leading us back through the balcony doors, she paused at a small control panel on the wall, dimming the apartment lights until only the glow from outside remained, casting everything in gentle shadow and silver. The space felt different now, more intimate, as if the world beyond her windows had faded to a soft blur of light and movement. Alina turned to face me, and I noticed how the city glow caught in her hair, highlighting the silver strands among the auburn. Her eyes held mine with an intensity that made my breath catch. When we came together this time, it was slower, deliberate, a choice we were both making with absolute clarity. I traced my fingers along her jaw, memorizing the softness of her skin, the way she leaned into my touch. The scent of jasmine clung subtly to her hair, mixing with the lingering notes of wine on her breath. There was something striking about how she managed to be both absolutely certain and achingly vulnerable in the same moment. She took my hand again, leading me through her apartment. We passed the carefully curated walls of art that spoke her story, shelves of books that had shaped her journey. Each step felt weighted with meaning, carrying us toward something we'd both been moving toward since that first shared glance at the wedding. At her bedroom door, Alina paused. She turned to face me, her back against the doorframe, giving me one final moment to reconsider. The dim light carved shadows beneath her cheekbones, and I could see the question in her eyes. A last chance to step back from this threshold. Instead, I drew her close, one hand at the small of her back, the other cradling her face. "I've never been more certain of anything," I whispered against her temple, feeling her slight shiver at my words. She reached behind her for the door handle, and we crossed into her room together. The door clicked shut with quiet finality, separating us from the rest of the world. Through her bedroom windows, the city continued its endless rhythm, cars moving like light streams below, buildings standing sentinel against the night sky, countless lives moving in their own orbits. But inside, time took on a different quality. What happened next belonged only to us, a private universe of discovery and connection that needed no witness. The night stretched ahead, full of promises finally ready to be kept, as we chose each other with eyes wide open. I won't tell you the rest. Some moments deserve to stay private, held close like precious secrets. But I'll never forget how that night felt, the way city light painted patterns on skin, how time seemed to both stop and flow, and how finding someone can feel like coming home to a place you've never been before. I woke to unfamiliar sunlight streaming through floor-tesseling windows, taking a moment to orient myself in Elena's bedroom. The morning light painted everything in soft gold, making the contemporary art on her walls glow like stained glass. For a few breaths, I simply lay there, letting memories of the night settle into place. The sound of quiet movement drew me from the bed. I found my clothes from yesterday, pulling them on before following the morning sounds toward the kitchen. And there she was. Elena stood by her kitchen window in a champagne-colored silk robe, her silver-touched auburn hair pulled back loosely at her neck. She held 2 coffee cups, already prepared, as she gazed out at the awakening city. You know, those moments that etch themselves into your memory. This was one of them. Elena turning toward me, bathed in dawn light, her expression holding that perfect balance of vulnerability and certainty that I was starting to recognize as uniquely hers. She didn't say anything, just extended one of the cups toward me with a soft smile. I joined her at the window, our shoulders touching as we watched the city below begin its Friday dance. Traffic was picking up on the streets, early commuters, moving like worker ants from this height. The coffee was perfect. She had remembered how I took it from our conversation at the wedding. "I don't have anywhere to be until the afternoon," Elena mentioned quietly, her cup warming her hands. "Galleries closed for installation." I cleared my schedule, I admitted, feeling a smile tug at my mouth. For the whole day, I was hoping, ... Turned to me then, her own smile widening. "Were you now?" The morning unfurled slowly after that. Elena had the Friday paper delivered, and we shared sections across her kitchen island, stealing glances over the business and arts pages. The silence between us felt comfortable, broken only by the occasional comment about an article, or the soft sound of coffee cups being set down. Her hand would brush mine when reaching for the culture section, and I found myself touching her shoulder. When I stood to refill our cups, each contact felt natural, as if we had been doing this dance for years instead of hours. "It feels strange," Elena said, folding the paper closed. "The wedding seems like it happened weeks ago, not days." I was just thinking the same thing. I watched her gather our empty cups, moving through her kitchen with elegant familiarity. "Everything since then feels ... like a different life entirely," she finished, turning back to me. The morning light caught her face again, and I saw in her eyes the same recognition I felt, that whatever this was between us, it had become undeniably real. The day stretched ahead of us, unhurried and full of possibility. Through the windows, the city continued waking up, but here in Elena's kitchen, we had found our own quiet rhythm, measured in shared glances and gentle touches and the promise of hours yet to come. If tonight's ending felt right, hit subscribe, and share this with one person who needs a gentle story. I'll be here tomorrow with another